Homily 21 of Homilies of St. John Chrysostom on First Corinthians. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Homily 21, 1 Corinthians 9, verse 1. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are not ye my work in the Lord? Inasmuch as he had been saying, If meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend, a thing which he had not yet done, but professed he would do, if need require, lest any man should say, Thou vaultest thyself at random, and art severe in discourse, and utterest words of promise, a thing easy to me or to anybody. But if these sayings come from thy heart, show by deeds something which thou hast slighted, in order to avoid offending thy brother. For this cause I say, in what follows he is compelled to enter on the proof of this also, and to point out how he was used to forego even things permitted, that he might not give offense, although without any law to enforce his doing so. And we are not yet come to the admirable part of the matter, though it be admirable, his abstaining even from things lawful to avoid offense. But it is his habit of doing so at the cost of so much trouble and danger. For why saith he, Speak of the idol sacrifices? Since although Christ had enjoined that those who preach the gospel should live at the charge of their disciples, I did not so, but chose, if need were, to end my life with famine and to die the most grievous of deaths, so I might avoid receiving of those whom I instruct, not because they would otherwise be offended, but because his not receiving would edify them, a much greater thing for him to do. And to witness this he summons themselves among whom he was used to live in toil and in hunger, nourished by others, and put to straits, in order not to offend them. And yet there was no ground for their taking offense, for it would but have been a law which he was fulfilling. But for all this, by a sort of supererogation, he used to spare them. Now if he did more than was enacted, lest they should take offense, and abstained from permitted things to edify others, what must they deserve who abstain not from idol sacrifices, and that when many perish thereby? A thing which even apart from all scandal one ought to shrink from, as being the table of devils. The sum, therefore, of this whole topic is this, which he works out in many verses. But we must resume it, and make a fresh entrance on what he hath alleged, for neither hath he set it down thus expressly, as I have worded it, nor doth he leap at once upon it, but begins from another topic, thus speaking, Am I not an apostle? For besides all that hath been said, this also makes no small difference, that Paul himself is the person thus conducting himself. As thus, to prevent their alleging, you may taste of the sacrifices, sealing yourself at the same time. For a while he withstands not that statement, but argues, though it were lawful, your brethren's harm should keep you from doing so. And afterwards he proves that it is not even lawful. In this particular place, however, he is engaged in establishing the former point from the circumstances relating to himself, and intending presently to say that he had received nothing from them. He sets it not down at once, but his own dignity is what he first affirms. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Thus to hinder their saying, True, thou didst not receive, but the reason thou didst not was its not being lawful. He sets down therefore the causes, why he might reasonably have received, had he been willing to do so. Further, that there might not seem to be anything invidious in regard of Peter and such as Peter in his saying these things, for they did not use to decline receiving. He first signifies that they had authority to receive, and then that no one might say, Peter had authority to receive, but thou hadst not. He possesses the hearer beforehand with these high statements concerning himself, and perceiving that he must praise himself, for that was the way to correct the Corinthians, yet disliking to say anything great of himself, see how he hath tempered both feelings as the occasion required, limiting his own panegyric, not by what he knew of himself, but by what the subject matter of necessity required. For he might have said, I most of all had a right to receive, even more than they, because I have labored more abundantly than they. But this he omits, being a point wherein he surpassed them, and those points wherein they were great, and which were just grounds for their receiving, those only he sets down as follows. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? i.e., have I not authority over myself? Am I under any, to overrule me, and forbidding my receiving? But they have an advantage over you, in having been with Christ. Nay, is this denied me, with a view to which he saith, Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? For last of all, saith he, as unto one born out of due time, he appeared unto me also. Now this likewise was no small dignity, since many prophets, saith he, and righteous men have desired to see the things which ye see, and have not seen them. Days will come when ye shall desire to see one of these days. What then, though thou be an apostle and free, and hast seen Christ, if thou hast not exhibited any work of an apostle, how then can it be right for thee to receive? Wherefore after this he adds, Are ye not my work in the Lord? For this is the great thing, and those others avail nothing. Apart from this, even Judas himself was an apostle and free, and saw Christ, because he had not the work of an apostle. All those things profited him not. You see then why he adds this also, and calls themselves to be witnesses of it. Moreover, because it was a great thing which he had uttered, see how he chastens it, adding, In the Lord, the work is God's, not mine. Verse 2, If I be not an apostle unto theirs, yet doubtless I am unto you. Do you see how far he is from enlarging here without necessity? And yet he had the whole world to speak of, and barbarous nations in sea and land. However, he mentions none of these things, but carries his point on the first onset, and even granting more than he need, as if he had said, Why need I dwell on things over and above, since these even alone are enough for my present purpose? I speak not, you will observe, of my achievements in other quarters, but of those which have you for witnesses, upon which it follows, that if from no other quarter, yet from you I have a right to receive. Nevertheless, from whom I had most right to receive, even you whose teacher I was, from those I received not. If I be not an apostle to others, yet doubtless I am to you. Again he states his point as one coming to close quarters, for the whole world had him for its apostle. However, saith he, I say not that, I am not contending nor disputing, but what concerns you so much I lay down, for the seal of mine apostleship are ye, i.e. its proof. Should anyone moreover desire to learn whence I am an apostle, you are the persons whom I bring forward. For all the signs of an apostle have I exhibited among you, and not one have I failed in. As also he speaks in the second epistle, saying, Though I be nothing, yet the signs of an apostle were wrought among you in all patience, in signs and wonders and mighty deeds. For what is it wherein ye were inferior to the other churches? Wherefore he saith, The seal of mine apostleship are ye. For I both exhibited miracles and taught by word, and underwent dangers, and showed forth a blameless life. And these topics you may see fully set forth by these two epistles. Now he lays before them the demonstration of each with all exactness. Verse 3, Mine answer to them that do examine me is this. What is? Mine answer to them that do examine me is this. To those who seek to know whereby I am proved to be an apostle, or who accuse me as receiving money, or inquire the cause of my not receiving, or would fain show that I am not an apostle, to all such my instruction given to you, and these things to which I am about to say may stand for a full explanation and apology. What then are these? Verse 4 and 5. Have we not power to eat or to drink? Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife? Why, how are these sayings an apology? Because when it appears that I abstain even from the things which are allowed, it cannot be just to look suspiciously on me as a deceiver or one acting for gain. Wherefore, from what was before alleged, and from my having instructed you, and from this which I have now said, I have matter sufficient to make my apology to you, and all who examine me I meet upon this ground, alleging both what has gone before, and this which follows. Have we not power to eat and to drink? Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife? Yet for all this, having it, I abstain. What then? Did he not use to eat or to drink? It were most true to say that in many places he really did not eat nor drink. For in famine, saith he, and in thirst, and in nakedness we were abiding. Here, however, this is not his meaning, but what? We eat not nor drink, receiving of those whom we instruct, though we have a right so to receive. Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife, even as the other apostles, and as the brethren of the Lord, and Cephas? Observe his skillfulness. The leader of the choir stands last in his arrangement, since that is the time for laying down the strongest of all one's topics. Nor was it so wonderful for one to be able to point out examples of this conduct in the rest, as in the foremost champion, and in him who is entrusted with the keys of heaven. But neither does he mention Peter only, but all of them, as if he had said, whether you seek the inferior sort, or the more eminent, in all you find patterns of this sort drawn out for you. For the brethren too of the Lord, being free from their first unbelief, had come to be among those who were approved, although they attained it not to the apostles. And accordingly, the middle place is that which he hath assigned to them, setting down those who were in the extremes before and after. Verse 6. Where I only and Barnabas have not we power to forbear working. See his humility of mind, and his soul purified from all envy, how he takes care not to conceal him whom he knew to be a partaker with himself in this perfection. For if the other things be common, how is not this common? Both they and we are apostles, and we are free, and have exhibited the works of the apostles, and have seen Christ. Wherefore we likewise have power both to live without working, and to be supported by our disciples. Verse 7. Who goeth a warfare at any time at his own charges? For instance, which was the strongest point he had proved from the apostles, that it is lawful to do so. He next comes to examples, and to the common practice, as he uses to do. Who goeth a warfare at his own charges, saith he. But do thou consider, I pray, how very suitable are the examples which he brings to his proposed subject, and how he mentions first that which is accompanied with danger, viz., soldiership in arms and wars. For such a kind of thing was the apostolate, nay, rather, much more hazardous than these. For not with men alone was their warfare, but with devils also, and against the prince of those beings was their battle array. What he saith therefore is this: not even do heathen governors, cruel and unjust as they are, require their soldiers to endure service and peril, and live on their own means. How then could Christ ever have required this? Nor is he satisfied with one example, for to him who is rather simple and dull, this also is wont to come as a great refreshment, viz. their seeing the common custom also going along with the laws of God. Wherefore he proceeds to another topic also, and says, Who planteth the vineyard, and eateth not the fruit thereof? For as by the former he indicated his dangers, so by this his labor, and abundant travail and care. He adds likewise a third example, saying, Who feedeth a flock, and eateth not the milk thereof? He is exhibiting the great care which it becomes a teacher to take of those who are under his rule. For in fact the apostles were both soldiers and husbandmen and shepherds, not of the earth, nor of irrational animals, nor in such wars are perceptible by sense, but of reasonable souls, and in battle array with the devils. It also must be remarked how everywhere he preserves moderation, seeking the useful only, not the extraordinary. For he said not, who goeth a warfare and is not enriched, but who goeth a warfare at any time at his own charges. Neither did he say, who planteth a vineyard, and gathereth not gold, nor spareth to collect the whole fruit, but who eateth not the fruit thereof. Neither did he say, who feedeth a flock, and maketh not merchandise of the lambs, but what? Eateth not the milk thereof, not of the lambs, but of the milk, signifying that a little relief should be enough for the teacher, even his necessary food alone. So much for those who would devour all, and gather the whole of the fruit. So likewise the Lord ordained, saying, the laborer is worthy of his hire. And not this only doth he establish by his illustrations, but he implies also what kind of man a priest ought to be. For he ought to possess both the courage of a soldier, and the diligence of a husbandman, and the carefulness of a shepherd, and after all these to seek nothing more than necessaries, having shown, as you see, both from the apostles, that it is not forbidden the teacher to receive, and from illustrations found in common life, he proceeds also to a third head, thus saying, verse 8, Say I these things as a man, or saith not the law the same also? For since he had hitherto alleged nothing out of the Scriptures, but put forward the common custom, think not, saith he, that I am confident in these alone, nor that I go to the opinions of men for the ground of these enactments. For I can show that these things are also well-pleasing to God, and I read an ancient law enjoining these things. Wherefore also he carries on his discourse in the form of a question, which is apt to be done in things fully acknowledged, thus saying, Say I these things as a man, i.e., do I strengthen myself only by human examples, or saith not the law the same also? Verse 9, For it is written in the law of Moses, Thou shalt not muzzle the ox which treadeth out the corn. And on what account hath he mentioned this, having the example of the priests? Wishing to establish it far beyond what the case required. Further, lest any should say, And what have I to do with the saying about the oxen? He works it out more exactly, saying, Doth God take care for oxen? Doth God then tell me, Take no care for oxen? Well, he doth take care of them, but not so much as to make a law concerning such a thing as this. So that had he not been hinting at something more important, exercising the Jews in mercy in the case of the brutes, and through these discoursing with them of the teachers also, he would not have taken so much interest in it, as even to make a law to permit the muzzling of oxen. Wherein he points out another thing likewise, that the labor of teachers both is great and ought so to be. And again another thing, what then is this? That whatever is said by the Old Testament, inculcating care for brutes, in its principal meaning bears the instruction of human beings, as in fact do all the rest. The precepts, for example, concerning various garments, and those concerning vineyards and seeds, and not making the ground bear divers crops, and the precepts concerning leprosy, and in a word, all the rest. For they being of a duller sort, he was discoursing with them from these topics, advancing them by little and little. And see now, in what follows, he doth not even confirm it, as being clear and self-evident. For having said, Doth God take care for oxen? He added, Or saith he it altogether for ourselves, not adding even the altogether at random, but that he might not leave the hearer anything whatever to reply. And he dwells upon the metaphor, saying and declaring, For our sakes no doubt it is written, that he who ploweth ought to plow in hope, i.e., the teacher ought to enjoy the returns of his labors, and he that thresheth ought to partake of his hope in hope. And observe his wisdom, in that from the seed he transferred the matter to the threshing floor, herein also again manifesting the many toils of the teachers, that they in their own persons both plow and tread the floor, and of the plowing, because there was nothing to reap but labor only, he used the word hope. But of treading the floor he presently allows the fruit, saying, He that thresheth is a partaker of his hope. Further, lest any should say, Is this, then, the return for so many toils? He adds, in hope, i.e., which is to come. No other thing, therefore, doth the mouth of this animal, being unmuzzled, declared, than this, that the teachers who labor ought also to enjoy some return. Verse 11. If we have sown unto you our spiritual things, is it a great matter if we should reap your carnal things? Lo, he addresses also a fourth argument for the duty of yielding support. For since he had said, Who goeth a warfare at any time at his own charges? And who planteth a vineyard? And who feedeth a flock? And had introduced the ox that treadeth the corn, he points out likewise another most reasonable cause, on account of which they might justly receive, viz., as having bestowed much greater gifts, not now as having labored only. What is it then? If we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it a great matter if we shall reap your carnal things? Seest thou a most just allegation, and fuller of reason than all the former? For in those instances, says he, carnal is the seed, carnal also is the fruit. But here not so, but the seed is spiritual, the return carnal. Thus to prevent high thoughts in those who contribute to their teachers, he signified that they received more than they give. As if he had said, Husbandmen, whatsoever they sow, this also do they receive. But we, sowing in your souls spiritual things, do reap carnal, for such is the kind of support given by them. Further, and still more, to put them to the blush. Verse 12. If others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? See also again another argument, and this too from examples, though not of the same kind. For it is not Peter whom he mentions here, nor the apostles, but certain other spurious ones, with whom he afterwards enters into combat, and concerning whom he says, If a man deliver you, if a man take of you, if a man exalt himself, if a man smite you on the face. And already he is sounding the prelude to the fight with them. Wherefore neither did he say, If others take of you, but pointing out their insolence in tyranny and trafficking, he says, If others be partakers of this power over you, i.e., rule you, exercise authority, use you as servants, not taking only, but quite as a matter of business, and with much authority. Wherefore he added, Are not we much rather? Which he would not have said if the discourse were concerning the apostles. But it is evident that he hints at certain pestilent men and deceivers of them, so that besides the law of Moses, even ye yourselves have made a law in behalf of the duty of contribution. And having said, Are not we much rather? He does not prove why much rather, but leaves it to their consciences to prove them of that, wishing at once both to alarm and to abash them more thoroughly. Nevertheless, we have not used this power, i.e., have not received. Do you see, when he had by so many reasons before proved that receiving is not unlawful, how he next says, We receive not, that he might not seem to abstain as from a thing forbidden. For not because it is unlawful, saith he, do I not receive, for it is lawful, and this we have many ways shown, from the apostles, from the affairs of life, the soldier, the husbandman, and the shepherd, from the law of Moses, from the very nature of the case, in that we have sown unto you spiritual things, from what yourselves have done to those others. But as he had laid down these things, lest he should seem to put to shame the apostles who were in the habit of receiving, abashing them and signifying that not as from a forbidden thing doth he abstain from it, so again, lest by his large store of proof and many examples, by which he had pointed out the propriety of receiving, he should seem to be anxious to receive himself, and therefore to say these things, he now corrects it, and afterwards he laid it down more clearly, where he says, But I have not written these things, that it should be so done unto me. But here his words are, We have not used this power. And what is still a greater thing, neither could have any this to say, that being in abundance we declined using it. Rather, when necessity pressed upon us, we would not yield to the necessity, which also in the second epistle he says, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them, to do you service, and when I was present with you and wanted, I was chargeable to no man. And in this epistle again, we both hunger and thirst and are naked, and are buffeted. And here again he hints the same thing, saying, But we suffer all things. For by saying, We suffer all things, he intimates both hunger and great straits, and all the other things. But not even thus have we been compelled, saith he, to break the law, which we laid down for ourselves. Wherefore, lest we should give some hindrance to the gospel of Christ. For since the Corinthians were rather weak-minded, lest we should wound you, saith he, by receiving we choose to do even more than was commanded, rather than hinder the gospel, i.e., your instruction. Now if we in a matter left free to us, and when we were both enduring much hardship and having apostles for our pattern, used abstinence, lest we should give hindrance, and he did not say subversion, but hindrance, nor simply hindrance, but any hindrance, that we might not, so to speak, cause so much as the slightest suspense and delay to the course of the word. If now, saith he, we used so great care, how much more ought you to abstain, who both come far short of the apostles, and have no law to mention, giving you permission, but contrariwise are both putting your hand to things forbidden, and things which tend to the great injury of the gospel, not to its hindrance only, and not even having any pressing necessity in view. For all this discussion he had moved on account of these Corinthians, who were offending their weaker brethren by eating of things sacrificed to idols. These things also let us listen to, beloved, that we may not despise those who are offended, nor cause any hindrance to the gospel of Christ, that we may not betray our own salvation. And say not thou to me, when thy brother is offended, this or that whereby he is offended hath not been forbidden, it is permitted. For I have something greater to say to thee. Although Christ himself have permitted it, yet if thou seest any injury, stop and do not use the permission. For this also did Paul, when he might have received. Christ having granted permission, he received not. Thus hath our Lord in his mercy mingled much gentleness with his precepts, that it might not be all merely of commandment, but that we might do much also of our own mind, since it was in his power, had he not been so minded, to extend the commandments further, and to say, He who fasts not continually, let him be chastised. He who keeps not his virginity, let him be punished. He that doth not strip of all that he hath, let him suffer the severest penalty. But he did not so, giving thee occasion, if thou wilt, to be forward in doing more. Wherefore, both when he was discoursing about virginity, he said, He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. Yet in the case of the rich man, some things he commanded, but some he left to the determination of his mind. For he said not, Sell what thou hast, but, if thou wilt be perfect, sell. But we are not only not forward to do more, and to go beyond the precepts, but we fall very short even of the measure of things commanded. And whereas Paul suffered hunger, that he might not hinder the gospel, we have not the heart even to touch what is in our own stores, though we see innumerable souls overthrown. Yea, saith one, Let the moth eat, and let not the poor eat. Let the worm devour, and let not the naked be clothed. Let all be wasted away with time, and let not Christ be fed. And this when he hungereth. Why, who said this? It will be asked, Nay, this is the very grievance, that not in words but in deeds these things are said. For it were less grievous uttered in words than done in deeds. For is not this the cry day by day of the inhuman and cruel tyrant? Covetousness to those who are led captive by her. Let your goods be set before informers and robbers and traders for luxury, and not before the hungry and needy for their sustenance. Is it not ye then who make robbers? Is it not ye who minister fuel to the fire of the envious? Is it not ye who make vagabonds and traitors, putting your wealth before them for a bait? What madness is this? For a madness it is and a plain distraction, to fill your chests with apparel, and overlook him that is made after God's image and similitude, naked and trembling with cold, and with difficulty keeping himself upright. But he pretends, saith one, this tremor and weakness. And dost thou not fear, lest a thunderbolt from heaven, kindled by this word, should fall upon thee? For I am bursting with wrath, bear with me. Thou, I say, pampering and fattening thyself, and extending thy potations to the dead of night, and comforting thyself in soft coverlets, dost not deem thyself meet for judgment, so lawlessly using the gifts of God. For wine was not made that we should be drunken, nor food that we should pamper our appetites, nor meats that we should distend the belly. But from the poor, the wretched, from him that is as good as dead, from him demandest thou strict accounts. And dost thou not fear Christ's tribunal, so full of all awfulness and terror? Why, if he do play the hypocrite, he doth it of necessity and want, because of thy cruelty and inhumanity, requiring the use of such masks, and refusing all inclination to mercy. For who is so wretched and miserable, as without urgent necessity, for one loaf of bread to submit to such disgrace, and to bewail himself and endure so severe a punishment? So that this hypocrisy of his goeth about, the herald of thine inhumanity. For since by supplicating and beseeching, and uttering piteous expressions, and lamenting and weeping, and going about all day, he doth not obtain even necessary food, he devised perhaps even this contrivance also, the disgrace and blame whereof falls not so much on himself as on thee. For he indeed is meet to be pitied, because he hath fallen into so great necessity. But we are worthy of innumerable punishments, because we compel the poor to suffer such things. For if we would easily give way, never would he have chosen to endure such things. And why speak I of nakedness and trembling? For I will tell a thing yet more to be shuddered at, that some have been compelled even to deprive their children of sight at an early age, in order that they might touch our insensibility. For since when they could see and went about naked, neither by their age nor by their misfortunes could they win favor of the unpitying, they added to so great evils another yet sterner tragedy, that they might remove their hunger, thinking it to be a lighter thing to be deprived of this common light, and that sunshine which is given to all, than to struggle with continual famine, and endure the most miserable of deaths. Thus, since you have not learned to pity poverty, but delight yourselves in misfortunes, they satisfy your insatiable desire, and both for themselves and for you kindle a fiercer flame in hell. And to conceive you that this is the reason why these and such like things are done, I will tell you of an acknowledged and certain proof, which no man can gainsay. There are other poor men of light and unsteady minds, and not knowing how to bear hunger, but rather enduring everything than it. These having often tried to deal with you by piteous gestures and words, and finding that they availed nothing, have left off those supplications, and thenceforward your very wonder-workers are surpassed by them. Some chewing the skins of worn-out shoes, and some affixing sharp nails into their heads, others lying about in frozen pools with naked stomachs, and others enduring different things yet more horrid than these, that they may draw around them the ungodly spectators. And thou, while these things are going on, standest laughing and wondering the while, and making a fine show of other men's miseries, our common nature disgracing itself. And what could a fierce demon do more? Next you give him money in abundance, that he may do these things more promptly. And to him that prays, and calls on God, and approaches with modesty, you neither vouchsafe an answer nor a look. Rather you utter to him, continually teasing you, those disgusting expressions, ought this fellow to live, or at all to breathe and see the sun? Whereas to the other sort you are both cheerful and liberal, as though you were appointed to dispense the prize of that ridiculous and satanic unseemliness. Wherefore, with more propriety, to those who appoint these sports and bestow nothing till they see others punishing themselves, might these words be addressed: Ought these men to live, to breathe at all, and see the sun, who transgress against our common nature, who insult God? For whereas God saith, Give alms, and I give thee the kingdom of heaven, thou hearest not. But when the devil shows thee a head pierced with nails, on a sudden thou hast become liberal. And the contrivance of the evil spirit, pregnant with so much mischief, hath wrought upon thee more than the promise of God, bringing innumerable blessings. If gold were to be laid down to prevent the doing of these things, or the looking upon them when done, there is nothing which thou oughtest not to practice and endure, to get rid of so excessive madness. But ye contrive everything to have them done, and look on the doing of them. As yet askest thou then, Tell me, to what end is hellfire? Nay, ask not that any more, but how is there one hell only? For of how many punishments are not they worthy, who get up this cruel and merciless spectacle, and laugh at what both they and yourselves ought to weep over? Yea, rather of the two, ye who compel them to such unseemly doings. But I do not compel them, say you. What else but compelling is it? I should like to know. Those who are more modest and shed tears, and invoke God, thou art impatient even of listening to. But for these thou both findest silver in abundance, and bringest around thee many to admire them. Well, let us depart, say you, pitying them, and dost thou too enjoin this? Nay, it is not pity, O man, to demand so severe a punishment for a few pence, to order men to maim themselves for necessary food, and cut into many pieces the skin of their head so mercilessly and pitifully. Gently, say you, for it is not we who pierce those heads. Would it were thou, and the horror would not be so horrible. For he that slays a man does a much more grievous thing than he who bids him slay himself, which indeed happens in the case of these persons. For they endure more bitter pains when they are bidden to be themselves the executors of these wicked commands. And all this in Antioch, where men were first called Christians, wherein are bred the most civilized of mankind, where in old time the fruit of charity flourished so abundantly, for not only to those at hand, but also to those very far off, they used to send, and this when famine was expected. What then ought we to do, say you, to cease from this savage practice, and to convince all that are in need, that by doing these things they will gain nothing? But if they modestly approach, they shall find your liberality great. Let them be once aware of this, even though they be of all men most miserable, they will never choose to punish themselves so severely, I pledge myself. Nay, they will even give you thanks for delivering them both from the mockery and the pain of that way of life. But as it is, for charioteers you would sell even your own children, and for dancers you would throw away your very souls, while for Christ and hungered you spare not the smallest portion of your substance. But if you give a little silver, you think as much of it as if you had laid out all you have, not knowing that not the giving, but the giving liberally, this is true almsgiving. Wherefore also it is not those simply who give, whom the prophet proclaims and calls happy, but those who bestow liberally. For he doth not say simply, He hath given, but what? He hath dispersed abroad, he hath given to the poor. For what profit is it, when out of it thou givest, as it were, a glass of water out of the sea, and even a widow woman's magnanimity is beyond thy emulation? And how wilt thou say, Have mercy on me, O Lord, according to thy great mercy, and according to the multitude of thy mercies blot out my transgression, thyself not showing mercy according to any great mercy, nay, haply not according to any little? For I am greatly ashamed, I own, when I see many of the rich riding upon their golden bitted chargers, with a train of domestics clad in gold, and having couches of silver, and other and more pomp, and yet, when there is need to give to a poor man, becoming more beggarly than the very poorest. But what is their constant talk? He hath, they say, the common church allowance. And what is that to thee? For thou wilt not be saved because I give. Nor, if the church bestow, hast thou blotted out thine own sins. For this cause givest thou not, because the church ought to give to the needy, because the priests pray, wilt thou never pray thyself, and because others fast, wilt thou be continually drunken. Knowest thou not that God enacted not almsgiving so much for the sake of the poor, as for the sake of the persons themselves who bestow? But dost thou suspect the priest? Why, this thing itself, to begin with, is a grievous sin. However, I will not examine the matter too nicely. Do thou it all in thine own person, and so shalt thou reap a double reward. Since in fact what we say in behalf of almsgiving, we say not that thou shouldest offer to us, but that thou shouldest thyself minister by thine own hands. For if thou bringest thine alms to me, perhaps thou mayest even be led captive by vainglory, and oftentimes likewise thou shalt go away offended through suspicion of something evil. But if ye do all things by yourselves, ye shall both be rid of offences and of unreasonable suspicion, and greater is your reward. Not therefore to compel you to bring your money hither do I say these things, nor from indignation on account of the priests being ill reported of. For if one must be indignant and grieve, for you should be our grief who say this ill, since to them who are spoken ill of falsely and vainly, the reward is greater, but to the speakers the condemnation and punishment is heavier. I say not these things therefore in their behalf, but in solicitude and care for you. For what marvel is it if some in our generation are suspected, when in the case of those holy men who imitated the angels, who possessed nothing of their own, I mean the apostles, there was a murmuring in the ministration to the widows, that the poor were overlooked, when not one said that aught of the things he possessed was his own, but that they had all things in common. Let us not, then, put forward these pretexts, nor account it an excuse, that the church is wealthy, but when you see the greatness of her substance, bear in mind also the crowds of poor, who are on her list, the multitudes of her sick, her occasions of endless expenses. Investigate, scrutinize. There is none to forbid, nay, they are even ready to give you an account. But it is something beyond which I want you to do. Namely, when we have given our accounts, and proved that our expenditure is no less than our income, nay, sometimes more, I would gladly ask you this further question. When we depart hence, and shall hear Christ saying, Ye saw me hungry, and gave me no meat, naked, and ye clothed me not, what shall we say? What apology shall we make? Shall we bring forward such and such a person who disobeyed these commands, or some of the priests who were suspected? Nay, what is this to thee? For I accuse thee, saith he, of those things wherein thou hast thyself sinned, and the apology for these would be to have washed away thine own offences, not to point to others whose errors have been the same as thine. In fact, the church, through your meanness, is compelled to have such property as it has now, since if men did all things according to the apostolic laws, its revenue should have been your goodwill, which were both a secure chest and an inexhaustible treasure. But now when ye lay up for yourselves treasures upon the earth, and shut up all things in your own stores, while the church is compelled to be at charges with bands of widows, choirs of virgins, sojournings of strangers, distresses of foreigners, the misfortunes of prisoners, the necessities of the sick and maimed, and other such like causes, what must be done? Turn away from all these, and block up so many ports. Who then could endure the shipwrecks that would ensue, the weepings, the lamentations, the wailings which would reach us from every quarter? Let us not then speak at random what comes into our mind, for now, as I have just said, we are really prepared to render up our accounts to you. But even if it were the reverse, and ye had corrupt teachers, plundering and grasping at everything, not even so were their wickednesses an apology for you. For the lover of mankind and all-wise and only begotten Son of God, seeing all things and knowing the chance that in so great length of time, and in so vast a world, there would be many corrupt priests, let the carelessness of those under their rule should increase through their neglect, removing every excuse for indifference. In Moses' seat, saith he, sit the scribes and the Pharisees. All things, therefore, whatsoever they bid you do, do ye, but do not ye after their works, applying that even if thou hast a bad teacher, this will have no power to profit thee, except thou attend to the things which are spoken. For not from what thy teacher hath done, but from what thou hast heard and disobeyed. From that, I say, doth God pass his sentence upon thee. So that if thou doest the things commanded, thou shalt then stand with much boldness. But if thou disobey the things spoken, even though thou shouldest show 10,000 corrupt priests, this will not plead for thee at all. Since Judas also was an apostle, but nevertheless this shall never be an apology for the sacrilegious and covetous. Nor will any be able when accused to say, why, the apostle was a thief and sacrilegious and a traitor. Yea, this very thing shall most of all be our punishment and condemnation, that not even by the evils of others we were corrected. For this cause also these things were written, that we might shun all emulation of such things. Wherefore, leaving this person and that, let us take heed to ourselves, for each of us shall give an account of himself to God. In order therefore that we may render up this account with a good defense, let us well order our own lives, and stretch out a liberal hand to the needy, knowing that this only is our defense, and showing ourselves to have rightly done the things commanded, that there is no other whatever. And if we be able to procure this, we shall escape those intolerable pains of hell, and obtain the good things to come, unto which may we all attain, by the grace and mercy of our Lord Jesus Christ, with whom to the Father and the Holy Ghost be glory, power, and honor, now and ever, world without end. Amen. End of Homily 21. Homily 22 of Homilies of St. John Chrysostom on First Corinthians, Part 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Homily 22, 1 Corinthians 9, 13, and 14. Do ye not know that they which minister about holy things live of the temple, and they which wait at the altar are partakers with the altar? Even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. He takes great care to show that the receiving was not forbidden, whereupon, having said so much before, he was not content, but proceeds also to the law, furnishing an example closer to the point than the former. For it was not the same thing to bring forward the oxen, and to put forward the law expressly given concerning priests. But consider, I pray, in this also the wisdom of Paul, how he mentions the matter in a way to give it dignity. For he did not say, they which minister about holy things receive of those who offer them. But what? They eat of the temple, so that neither they who receive may be blamed, nor they who give may be lifted up. Wherefore also, what follows he hath set down in the same way. For neither did he say, they which wait at the altar receive of them which sacrifice, but are partakers with the altar. For the things offered now no longer belong to those who offered them, but to the temple and the altar. And he said not, they receive the holy things, but they eat of the temple, indicating again their moderation, and that it behooves them not to make money nor to be rich. And though he say that they are partakers with the altar, he doth not speak of equal distribution, but of relief given them as their due. And yet the case of the apostles was much stronger, for in the former instance the priesthood was an honor, but in the latter it was dangers, and slaughters, and violent deaths. Wherefore all the other examples together did not come up to the saying, if we have sown unto you spiritual things, since in saying we have sown he points out the storms and the dangers and the snares, and the unspeakable evils which they had endured in preaching. Nevertheless, though the superiority was so great, he was unwilling either to abase the things of the old law, or to exalt the things which belonged to himself. Nay, he even contracts his own, reckoning the superiority not from the dangers, but from the greatness of the gift. For he said not, if we have jeopardized ourselves, or exposed ourselves to snares, but if we have sown unto you spiritual things. And the part of the priests, as far as possible, he exalts, saying, they which minister about holy things, and they that wait at the altar, thereby intending to point out their continual servitude and patience. Again, as he had spoken of the priests among the Jews, and both of the Levites and the chief priests, so he hath expressed each of the orders, both the inferior and the superior, the one by saying, they which minister in holy things, and the other by saying, they which wait at the altar. For not to all was one work commanded, but some were entrusted with the coarser, others with the more exalted offices. Comprehending therefore all these, lest any should say, why talk to us of the old law? Knowest thou not that ours is the time of more perfect commandments? After all those topics, he placed that which is strongest above all, saying, verse 14, even so hath the Lord ordained, that they who preach the gospel should live of the gospel. Nor doth he even here say that they are supported by men, but as in the case of the priests of the temple and of the altar, so likewise here of the gospel. And there he saith, eat, so here live, not make merchandise nor lay up treasures, for the laborer, saith he, is worthy of his hire. Verse 15, but I have used none of these things. What then, if thou hast not used them now, saith one, but intendest to use them at a future time, and on this account sayest these things? Far from it, for he speedily corrected the notion, thus saying, neither have I written these things, that it should be so done unto me. And see with what vehemence he disavows and repels the thing. For it were better for me to die, than that any man should make my glorying void. And not once nor twice, but many times he uses this expression. For above he said, we have not used this power, and after this again, that I abuse not my power. And here, but I have used none of these things. These things, what things? The many examples, that is to say, many things giving me license. The soldier, the husbandman, the shepherd, the apostles, the law, the things done by us unto you, the things done by you unto the others, the priests, the ordinance of Christ. By none of these things have I been induced to abolish my own law and to receive. And speak not to me of the past, although I could say that I have endured much even in past times on this account. Nevertheless, I am not confident on the ground of it alone, but likewise concerning the future. I pledge myself that I would choose rather to die of hunger than be deprived of these crowns. For it were better for me to die, saith he, than that any man should make my glorying void. He said not that any man should abolish my law, but my glorying. For lest any should say, he doth it indeed, but not cheerfully, but with lamentation and grief, willing to show the excess of his joy, and the abundance of his zeal, he even calls the matter glorying. So far was he from vexing himself, that he even glories, and chooses rather to die than to fall from this glorying. So much dearer to him even than life itself was that proceeding of his. Next he exalts it from another consideration also, and signifies that it was a great thing, not that he might show himself famous, for far was he from that disposition, but to signify that he rejoices, and with a view more abundantly to take away all suspicion. For on this account, as I before said, he also called it a glorying. And what saith he? Verses 16, 17, and 18. For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe to me if I preach not the gospel. For if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, a dispensation is committed unto me. What is my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. What sayest thou, tell me? If thou preach the gospel, it is nothing for thee to glory of. But it is if thou make the gospel of Christ without charge. Is this therefore greater than that? By no means. But in another point of view it hath some advantage, inasmuch as the one is a command, but the other is a good deal of my own free will. For what things are done beyond the commandment have a reward in this respect, but such as are in the nature of a commandment, not so great. And so in this respect, he says, the one is more than the other, not in the very nature of the thing. For what is equal to preaching, since it maketh men vie even with the angels themselves? Nevertheless, the one being a commandment, and a debt, the other the forwardness of free will. In this respect, this is more than that. Wherefore he saith, explaining the same, what I just now mentioned. For if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward, but if against my will, a dispensation is committed unto me. Taking the words willing and against my will, of its being committed and not committed to him. And thus we must understand the expression, for necessity is laid upon me, not as though he did aught of these things against his will, God forbid, but as though he were bound by the things commanded, and for contradistinction to the liberty in receiving, before mentioned. Wherefore also Christ said to the disciples, When ye have done all, say, We are unprofitable servants, for we have done that which was our duty to do. What then is my reward? That when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel without charge. What then, tell me, hath Peter no reward? Nay, who can ever have so great an one as he? And what shall we say of the other apostles? How then said he, If I do this thing willingly, I have reward, but if against my will, a dispensation is committed unto me. Seest thou here also his wisdom? For he said not, But if against my will, I have no reward, but a dispensation is committed unto me, implying that even thus he hath a reward, but such as he obtains who hath performed what was commanded, not such as belongs to him, who hath of his own resources been generous, and exceeded the commandment. What then is the reward? That, when I preach the gospel, saith he, I may make the gospel without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. See how throughout he uses the term power, imitating this, as I have often observed, that neither are they who receive worthy of blame, but he added in the gospel, partly in order to specify the work of preaching, partly also to forbid our carrying the matter out into every case. For the teacher ought to receive, but not the mere drone also. Verse 19, For though I be free from all men, yet I made myself slave unto all, that I may gain the more. Here again he introduces another high step in advance. For a great thing it is even not to receive, but this which he is about to mention is much more than that. What then is that which he says? Not only have I not received, saith he, not only have I not used this power, but I have even made myself a slave, and in a slavery manifold and universal, for not in money alone, but which was much more than money, in employments many and various have I made good this same rule. And I have made myself a slave when I was subject to none, having no necessity in any respect. For this is the meaning of, though I be free from all men, and not even to any single person have I been a slave, but to the whole world. Wherefore also he subjoined, I have made myself servant unto all. That is, to preach the gospel I was commanded, and to proclaim the things committed to my trust, but the contriving and devising numberless things besides, all that was of my own zeal, for I was only under obligation to invest the money, whereas I did everything in order to get a return for it, attempting more than was commanded, thus doing as he did all things of free choice, in zeal and love to Christ. He had an insatiable desire for the salvation of mankind, wherefore also he was used to overpass by a very great deal the lines marked out, in every way springing higher than the very heaven. Next, having mentioned his servitude, he describes in what follows the various modes of it. And what are these? Verse 20, And I became, says he, to the Jews as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. And how did this take place? because he circumcised, that he might abolish circumcision. Wherefore he said not a Jew, but as a Jew, which was an economy. What sayest thou? The herald of the world, and he who touched the very heavens, and shone so bright in grace, doth he all at once descend so low? Yea, for this is to ascend. For you are not to look to the fact only of his descending, but also to his rising up him that was bowed down, and bringing him up to himself. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. Either it is the explanation of what went before, or he hints at some other thing besides the former, calling those Jews who were such originally and from the first, but under the law, the proselytes, or those who became believers, and yet adhered to the law. For they were no longer as Jews, yet under the law. And when was he under the law? When he shaved his head, when he offered sacrifice. Now these things were done, not because his mind changed, since such conduct would have been wickedness, but because his love condescended, for that he might bring over to this faith those who were really Jews. He became such himself, not really, showing himself such only, but not such in fact, nor doing these things from a mind so disposed. Indeed, how could he, zealous as he was to convert others also, and doing these things for no other cause, but that he might free others who did them from that degradation? Verse 21. To them that are without law, as without law. These were neither Jews, nor Christians, nor Greeks, but outside of the law, as was Cornelius, and if there were any others like him. For among these also, making his appearance, he used to assume many of their ways. But some say that he hints at his discourse with the Athenians from the inscription on the altar, and that so he saith, to them that are without law, as without law. Then, lest any should think that the matter was a change of mind, he added, but being without law to God, but under the law to Christ, i.e., so far from being without law, I am not simply under the law, but I have that law which is much more exalted than the elder one, viz., that of the Spirit and of grace. Wherefore he adds, to Christ. Then again, having made them confident of his judgment, he states also the gain of such condescension, saying, that I might gain them that are without law. And everywhere he brings forward the cause of his condescension, and stops not even here, but says, verse 22, to the weak also became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. In this part coming to their case, with a view to which also all these things have been spoken. However, those were much greater things, but this more to the purpose, whence also he hath placed it after them. Indeed, he did the same thing likewise in his epistle to the Romans, when he was finding fault about meats, and in so many other places. Next, not to waste time by naming all severally, he saith, I am made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Seest thou how far it is carried? I am made all things to all men, not expecting, however, to save all, but that I may save, though it be but a few. And so great care and service have I undergone, as one naturally would who was about saving all. Far, however, from hoping to gain all, which was truly magnanimous, and a proof of burning zeal, since likewise the sower sowed everywhere, and saved not all the seed, notwithstanding he did his part, and having mentioned the fewness of those who are saved, again adding, by all means he consoled those to whom this was a grief. For though it be not possible that all the seed should be saved, nevertheless it cannot be that all should perish. Wherefore he said, by all means, because one who so ardently zealous must certainly have some success. Verse 23. And I do all things for the gospel's sake, that I may be a fellow partaker thereof. That is, that I may seem also myself to have added some contribution of mine own, and may partake of the crowns laid up for the faithful. For as he spake of living of the gospel, i.e., of the believers, so also here, that I might be fellow partaker in the gospel, that I might be able to partake with them that have believed in the gospel. Do you perceive his humility? How, in the recompense of rewards, he places himself as one of the many, though he had exceeded all his labors, whence it is evident that he would in his reward also. Nevertheless, he claims not to enjoy the first prize, but is content, if so be he may partake with the others in the crowns laid up for them. But these things he said, not because he did this for any reward, but that hereby at least he might draw them on, and by these hopes might induce them to do all things for their brethren's sake. Seest thou his wisdom? Seest thou the excellency of his perfection? How he wrought beyond the things commanded, not receiving, when it was lawful to receive. Seest thou the exceeding greatness of his condescension? How he that was under the law to Christ, and kept that highest law, to them that were without the law, was as one without the law, to the Jews, as a Jew, in either kind showing himself preeminent and surpassing all. This also do thou, and think not being eminent, that thou lowerest thyself, when for thy brother's sake thou submittest to some abasement. For this is not to fall, but to descend. For he who falls lies prostrate, hardly to be raised up again. But he who descends shall also rise again with much advantage. As also Paul descended indeed alone, but ascended with the whole world, not acting apart, for he would not have sought the gain of them that are saved, had he been acting, since the hypocrite seeks men's perdition, and feigns that he may receive, not that he may give. But the apostle not so, as a physician rather, as a teacher, as a father, the one to the sick, the other to the disciple, the other to the son, condescends for his correction, not for his hurt. So likewise did he, to show that the things which have been stated were not pretense, in a case where he is not compelled to do or say any such thing, but means to express his affection and his confidence. Hear him saying, neither life nor death, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature, shall be able to separate us from the love which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. Seest thou a love more ardent than fire? So let us also love Christ, for indeed it is easy, if we will, for neither was the apostle such by nature. On this account you see his former life was recorded, so contrary to this, that we may learn that the work is of free will, and that to the willing all things are easy. Let us not then despair, but even though thou be a reviler, or covetous, or whatsoever thou art, consider that Paul was a blasphemer and persecutor and injurious, and the chief of sinners, and suddenly rose to the very summit of virtue, and his former life proved no hindrance to him, and yet none with so great frenzy clings to vice as he did to the war against the church. For at that time he put his very life into it, and because he had not 10,000 hands, that he might stone Stephen with all of them, he was vexed. Notwithstanding, even thus he found how he might stone him with more hands, to wit, those of the false witnesses, whose clothes he kept. And again, when he entered into houses, like a wild beast, and no otherwise did he rush in, hauling, tearing, men and women, filling all things with tumult and confusion, and innumerable conflicts. For instance, so terrible was he that the apostles, even after his most grievous change, did not yet venture to join themselves to him. Nevertheless, after all those things, he became such as he was, for I need not say more. Where now are they who build up the necessity of fate against the freedom of the will? Let them hear these things, and let their mouths be stopped. For there is nothing to hinder him that willeth to become good, for even though before he should be one of the vilest. And in fact we are more aptly disposed that way, inasmuch as virtue is agreeable to our nature, and vice contrary to it, even as sickness and health. For God hath given us eyes, not that we may look wantonly, but that, admiring his handiwork, we may worship the Creator. and that this is the use of our eyes is evident from the things which are seen. For the luster of the sun and of the sky we see from an immeasurable distance, but a woman's beauty we cannot discern so far off. Seest thou that for this end our eye was chiefly given? Again he made the ear, that we should entertain not blasphemous words, but saving doctrines. Wherefore, you see, when it receives anything dissident, both our soul shudders, and our very body also. For saith one, the talk of him that sweareth much maketh the hair stand upright. And if we hear anything cruel or merciless, again our flesh creeps. But if anything decorous and kind, we even exult and rejoice. Again, if our mouth uttereth base words, it causes us to be ashamed and hide ourselves. But if grave words, it utters them with ease and all freedom. Now for those things which are according to nature no one would blush, but for those which are against nature. And the hands, when they steal, hide themselves and seek excuses. But if they give alms, they even glory, so that if we will, we have from every side a great inclination towards virtue. But if thou talk to me of the pleasure which arises from vice, consider that this also is a thing which we reap more of from virtue. For to have a good conscience, and to be looked up to by all, and to entertain good hopes, is of all things most pleasant to him that has seen into the nature of pleasure, even as the reverse is of all things the most grievous to him that knows the nature of pain, such as to be reproached by all, to be accused by our own conscience, to tremble and fear both at the future and the present. And that what I say may become more evident, let us suppose for argument's sake one man having a wife, yet defiling the marriage bed of his neighbor, and taking pleasure in this wicked robbery, enjoying his paramour. Then let us again oppose to him another who loves his own spouse, and that the victory may be greater and more evident, let the man who enjoys his own wife only have a fancy also for the other, the adulteress, but restrain his passion and do nothing evil, although neither is this pure chastity, however granting more than is necessary, that you may convince yourself how great is the pleasure of virtue. For this cause have we so framed our story. Now then, having brought them together, let us ask them accordingly, whose is the pleasanter life? And you will hear the one glorying and exulting in the conquest over his lust. But the other, or rather, there is no need to wait to be informed of anything by him. For thou shalt see him, though he deny it times without number, more wretched than men in a prison, for he fears and suspects all, both his own wife and the husband of the adulteress, and the adulteress herself, and domestics, and friends, and kinsmen, and walls and shadows, and himself. And what is worst of all, he hath his own conscience crying out against him, barking aloud every day. But if he should also bring to mind the judgment seat of God, he will not be able even to stand. And the pleasure is short, but the pain from it unceasing. For both at even and in the night in the desert, and the city, and everywhere, the accuser haunts him, pointing to a sharpened sword, and the intolerable punishments, and with that terror consuming and wasting him. But the other, the chaste person, is free from all these things, and is at liberty, and with comfort looks upon his wife, his children, his friends, and meets all with unembarrassed eyes. Now if he that is enamored, but is master of himself, enjoys so great pleasure, he that indulges no such passion, but is truly chaste, what harbor, what calm will be so sweet and serene as the mind which he will attain? And on this account you may see few adulterers, but many chaste persons. But if the former were the pleasanter, it would be preferred by the greater number. And tell me not of the terror of the laws, for this is not that which restrains them, but the excessive unreasonableness, and the fact that the pains of it are more than the pleasures, and the sentence of the conscience. Such then is the adulterer. Now, if you please, let us bring before you the covetous, laying bare again another lawless passion. For him too we shall see afraid of the same things, and unable to enjoy real pleasure. in that, calling to mind both those whom he hath wronged, and those who sympathize with them, and the public sentence of all concerning himself, he hath 10,000 agitations. And this is not his only vexation, but not even his beloved object can he enjoy, for such is the way of the covetous. Not that they may enjoy, do they possess, but that they may not enjoy. But if this seem to thee a riddle, hear next what is yet worse than this, and more perplexing, that not in this way only are they deprived of the pleasure of their goods, by their not venturing to use them as they would, but also by their never being filled with them, but living in a continual thirst, than which what can be more grievous? But the just man is not so, but is delivered both from trembling and hatred and fear, and this incurable thirst. And as all men curse the one, even so do all men conspire to bless the other. And as the one hath no friend, so hath the other no enemy. What now, these things being so acknowledged, can be more unpleasing than vice, or more pleasant than virtue? Nay, rather, though we should speak forever, no one shall be able to represent in discourse either the pain of this or the pleasure of the other, until we shall experience it. For then shall we find vice more bitter than gall, when we shall have fully tasted the honey of virtue. Not but vice is even now unpleasant, and disgusting and burdensome, and this not even her very votaries gainsay. But when we withdraw from her, then do we more clearly discern the bitterness of her commands. But if the multitude run to her, it is no marvel, since children also oftentimes, choosing things less pleasant, despise those which are more delightful, and the sick for a momentary satisfaction lose the perpetual and more certain joy. But this comes of the weakness and folly of those who are possessed with any fondness, not of the nature of the things. For it is the virtuous man who lives in pleasure, he who is rich indeed and free indeed. But if any one would grant the rest to virtue, liberty, security, freedom from cares, the fearing no man, the suspecting no man, but would not grant it pleasure, to laugh, and that heartily occurs to me, I confess, as the only cause to be taken. For what else is pleasure but freedom from care and fear and despondency, and the not being under the power of any? And whether is in pleasure, tell me, the man in frenzy and convulsions, who is goaded by diverse lusts, and is not even himself, or he who is freed from all these waves, and is settled in the love of wisdom, as it were in a harbor? Is it not evident the latter? But this would seem to be a thing particular to virtue, so that vice hath merely the name of pleasure, but of the substance it is destitute, and before the enjoyment it is madness, not pleasure, but after the enjoyment, straightway this also is extinguished. Now then, if neither at the beginning nor afterwards can one discern the pleasure of it, when will it appear, and where? And that thou mayest more clearly understand what I say, let us try the force of the argument in an example. Now consider, one is enamored of a fair and lovely woman. This man, as long as he cannot obtain his desire, is like unto men besides themselves and frantic. But after he hath obtained it, he hath quenched his appetite. If therefore neither at the beginning doth he feel pleasure, for the affair is madness, nor in the end, for by the indulgence of his lust he cools down his wild fancy, where after all are we to find it? But our doings are not such, but both at the beginning they are freed from all disturbance, and to the end the pleasure remains in its bloom. Nay, rather, there is no end of our pleasure, nor have our good things a limit, nor is this pleasure ever done away. Upon all these considerations, then, if we love pleasure, let us lay hold on virtue, that we may win good things both now and hereafter, unto which may we all attain, through the grace and mercy, etc. End of Homily 22. Homily 23 of Homilies of St. John Chrysostom on First Corinthians, Part 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 1 Corinthians 9:24. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? having pointed out the manifold usefulness of condescension, and that this is the highest perfectness, and that he himself, having risen higher than all towards perfection, or rather having gone beyond it by declining to receive, descended lower than all again, and having made known to us the times for each of these, both for the perfectness and for the condescension, he touches them more sharply in what follows, covertly intimating that this which was done by them, and which was counted a mark of perfectness, is a kind of superfluous and useless labor. And he said it not thus out clearly, lest they should become insolent, but the methods of proof employed by him makes this evident. And having said that they sin against Christ and destroy the brethren, and are nothing profited by this perfect knowledge, except charity be added, he again proceeds to a common example, and saith, Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? Now this he saith, not as though here also one only out of many would be saved. Far from it, but to set forth the exceeding diligence which it is our duty to use. For as there, though many descend into the course, not many are crowned. But this befalls one only, and it is not enough to descend into the contest, nor to have anointed oneself and wrestle. So likewise here it is not sufficient to have believed, and to have contended in any way, but unless we have so run, as unto the end to show ourselves unblameable, and to come near the prize, it will profit us nothing. For even though thou consider thyself to be perfect according to knowledge, thou shalt not attain the whole. Which hinting at, he said, So run that ye may obtain. They had not then yet, as it seems, attained, and having said thus, he teaches them also the manner. Verse 25, And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. What is all things? He doth not abstain from one, and err in another, but he masters entirely gluttony and lasciviousness and drunkenness, and all his passions. For this, saith he, takes place even in the heathen games. For neither is excess of wine permitted to those who contend at the time of the contest, nor wantonness, lest they should weaken their vigor, nor yet so much as to be bruised about anything else, but separating themselves altogether from all things, they apply themselves to their exercise only. Now if there these things be so, where the crown falls to one, much more here, where the incitement to emulation is more abundant. For here neither is one to be crowned alone, and the rewards also far surpass the labors. Wherefore also he puts it so as to shame them, saying, Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. Verse 26, I therefore so run, not as uncertainly. Thus having shamed them from those that are without, he next brings forward himself also, which kind of thing is a most excellent method of teaching, and accordingly we find him everywhere doing so. But what is not as uncertainly? Looking to some mark, saith he, not at random and in vain, as ye do. For what profit have ye of entering into idol temples and exhibiting forsooth that perfectness? None. But not such am I, but all things whatsoever I do for the salvation of my neighbor. Whether I show forth perfectness, it is for their sake, or condescension, for their sake again. Whether I surpass Peter in declining to receive, it is that they may not be offended, or descend lower than all. Being circumcised, and shaving my head, it is that they may not be subverted. This is not uncertainly. But thou, why dost thou eat in idol temples, tell me? Nay, thou canst not assign any reasonable cause. For meat commendeth thee not to God, neither if thou eat art thou the better, nor if thou eat not art thou the worse. Plainly then thou runnest inconsiderately, and at random, for this is uncertainly. So fight I, not as one that beateth the air. This he saith, again intimating that he acted not at random, nor in vain. For I have one at whom I may strike, i.e. the devil. But thou dost not strike him, but rashly throwest away thy strength. Now so far then, altogether bearing with him, he thus speaks. For since he had dwelt somewhat vehemently with them in the preceding part, he now on the contrary keeps back his rebuke, reserving for the end of the discourse the deep wound of all, since here he only says that they act at random and in vain, but afterwards signifies that it is at the risk of no less than utter ruin to their own soul, and that even apart from all injury to their brethren, neither are they themselves guiltless in daring so to act. Verse 27. But I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means, after that I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Here he implies that they are subject to the very lust of the belly, and give up the reins to it, and under a pretense of perfection fulfill their own greediness, a thought which before also he was travailing to express, when he said, meats for the belly, and the belly for meats. For since both fornication is called by luxury, and it also brought forth idolatry, he naturally oftentimes inveighs against this disease, and pointing out how great things he suffered for the gospel, he sets this also down among them. As I went, saith he, beyond the commands, and this when it was no light matter for me. For we even endure all things, it is said. So also here I submit to much labor, in order to live soberly. Stubborn as appetite is, and the tyranny of the belly, nevertheless I bridle it, and give not myself up to the passion, but endure all labor, not to be drawn aside by it. For do not, I pray you, suppose that by taking things easily I arrive at this desirable result. For it is a race and a manifold struggle, and a tyrannical nature continually rising up against me, and seeking to free itself. But I bear not with it, but keep it down, and bring it into subjection with many struggles. Now this he saith, that none may despairingly withdraw from the conflicts in behalf of virtue, because the undertaking is laborious. Wherefore he saith, I keep under and bring into subjection. He said not, I kill, for the flesh is not to be hated, but I keep under and bring into subjection, which is the part of a master, not of an enemy, of a teacher, not of a foe, of a schoolmaster, not of an adversary, lest by any means, having preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Now if Paul feared this, who had taught so many, and feared it after his preaching, and becoming an angel, and undertaking the patronage of the whole world, what can we say? For think not, saith he, because ye have believed, that this is sufficient for your salvation. Since if to me neither preaching nor teaching nor bringing over innumerable persons is enough for salvation, unless I exhibit my own conduct also unblameable, much less to you. Then he comes to other illustrations again, and as above he alleged the examples of the apostles, and those of common custom, and those of the priests, and his own, so also here those of the Olympic games. And having set down his own conduct, he again proceeds to the histories of the Old Testament, and because what he has to say will be somewhat unpleasing, he makes his exhortation general, and discourses not only concerning the subject before him, but also generally concerning all the evils among the Corinthians. And in the case of the heathen games, know ye not, saith he, but hear. Chapter 10, verse 1. Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant. Now this he said, implying that they were not very well instructed in these things. And what is this, which thou wouldest not have us ignorant of? Verses 1 through 5. That all our fathers, saith he, were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and drink the same spiritual drink. For they drank of a spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. and with the more part of them God was not well pleased. And wherefore saith he these things? To point out that as they were nothing profited by the enjoyment of so great a gift, so neither these by obtaining baptism, and partaking of spiritual mysteries, except they go on and show forth a life worthy of this grace. Wherefore also he introduces the types, both of baptism and of the mysteries. But what is, they were baptized into Moses, like as we, on our belief in Christ and his resurrection, are baptized, as being destined in our own persons to partake in the same mysteries. For we are baptized, saith he, for the dead, i.e., for our own bodies. Even so, they putting confidence in Moses, i.e., having seen him cross first, ventured also themselves into the waters. But because he wished to bring the type near the truth, he speaks it not thus, but uses the terms of the truth even in the type. Further, as this was a symbol of the font, so that which follows of the holy table. For as thou eatest the Lord's body, so they the manna, and as thou drinkest the blood, so they water from a rock. For though they were things of sense which were produced, yet were they naturally exhibited, not according to the order of nature, but according to the gracious intention of the gift, and together with the body nourished also the soul, leading it unto faith. On this account, you see, touching the food he made no remark, for it was extraordinary, not in mode only, but in nature also, for it was manna. But respecting the drink, since the matter only of the supply was extraordinary, and required proof, therefore, having said that they drank the same spiritual drink, he added, for they drank of a spiritual rock that followed them. And he subjoined, and that rock was Christ, for it was not the nature of the rock which sent forth the water. Such is his meaning, else would it as well have gushed out before this time, but another sort of rock, a spiritual one, performed the whole, even Christ, who was everywhere with them, and wrought all the wonders. For on this account he said, that followed them. Perceivest thou the wisdom of Paul, how in both cases he points out him as the giver, and thereby brings the type nigh to the truth? For he who set those things before them, saith he, the same also hath prepared this our table. And the same person both brought them through the sea, and thee through baptism, and before them set manna, and before thee his body and blood. As touching his gift then, such is the case. Now let us observe also what follows, and consider whether when they showed themselves unworthy of the gift, he spared them. Nay, this thou canst not say. Wherefore also he added, but with most of them God was not well pleased, although he had honored them with so great honor. Yea, it profited them nothing, but most of them perished. The truth is, they all perished, but that he might not seem to prophesy total destruction to these also, therefore he said the more part. And yet they were innumerable, but their number profited them nothing, and these were all so many tokens of love, but not even did this profit them, inasmuch as they did not themselves show forth the fruits of love. Thus, since most men disbelieve the things said of hell, as not being in presence or in sight, he alleges the things heretofore done as an indication that God doth punish all who sin, even though he have bestowed innumerable benefits upon them. For if ye disbelieve the things to come, so he speaks, yet surely the things that are past you will not disbelieve. Consider, for example, how great benefits he bestowed on them. From Egypt and the slavery, there he set them free, the sea he made their path. From heaven he brought down manna, from beneath he sent forth strange and marvelous fountains of water. He was with them everywhere, doing wonders, and fencing them in on every side. Nevertheless, since they showed forth nothing worthy of this gift, he spared them not, but destroyed them all. Verse 5, For they were overthrown, saith he, in the wilderness, declaring by this word both the sweeping destruction and the punishments, and the vengeance inflicted by God, and that they did not so much as attain to the rewards set immediately before them. Neither were they in the land of the promise, when he did these things unto them, but without and afar somewhere, and wide of that country, he thus visiting them with a double vengeance, both by not permitting them to see the land, and this too, though promised unto them, and also by actual severe punishment. And what are these things to us, say you? To thee surely they belong. Therefore also he adds, verse 6, Now these things were figures of us, for as the gifts are figures, even so are the punishments figures, and as the baptism and table were sketched out prophetically, so also by what ensued, the certainty of punishment coming on those who are unworthy of this gift was proclaimed beforehand for our sake, that we by these examples might learn soberness. Wherefore also he adds, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. For as in the benefits the types went before, and the substance followed, such shall be the order also in the punishments. Seest thou how he signifies not only the fact that these shall be punished, but also the degree more severely than those ancients? For if the one be type and the other substance, it must needs be that the punishments should as far exceed as the gifts. And see against whom he inveighs first, against those who would eat in the idol temples. For having said that we should not lust after evil things, which was general, he subjoins that which is particular, implying that each of their sins arose from evil lusting. And first he said this, verse 7, Neither be ye idolaters, as some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and to drink, and rose up to play. Do you hear how at length he calls them idolaters? Here indeed making the declaration, but afterwards bringing the proof. And he assigned the cause too, wherefore they ran to those tables, and this was gluttony. Wherefore having said, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, and having added, nor be idolaters, he names the cause for such transgression. And this was gluttony, for the people sat down, saith he, to eat and to drink, and he adds the end thereof, they rose up to play, for even as they, saith he, from sensuality passed into idolatry, so there is a fear, lest ye also may fall from the one into the other. Do you see how he signifies that these perfect men, forsooth, were more imperfect than the others? And he was striking at them, not in this respect only, their not bearing with their brethren throughout, but also in that the one sinned from ignorance, but the others from gluttony. And the ruin of the former he imputes to these for punishment, but allows not these to lay upon another the cause of their own sin, but pronounces them responsible both for their injury and for their own. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed. Wherefore doth he here make mention of fornication again, having so largely discoursed concerning it before. It is ever Paul's custom, when he brings a charge of many sins, both to set them forth in order, and separately to proceed with his proposed topics, and again in his discourses concerning other things, to make mention also of the former, which thing God also used to do in the Old Testament, in reference to each several transgression, reminding the Jews of the calf, and bringing that sin before them. This then, you see, Paul also does here, at the same time, both reminding them of that sin, and teaching that the parent of this evil also was luxury and gluttony. Wherefore also he adds, Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. And wherefore names he not likewise the punishment for their idolatry? It is because it was clear and more notorious, or because the plague was not so great at that time as the matter of Balaam, when they joined themselves to Baal Peor, the Midianite women appearing in the camp, and alluring them to wantonness according to the counsel of Balaam. For that this evil counsel was Balaam's, Moses showeth after this, in the following statement at the end of the book of Numbers. Balaam also, the son of Beor, they slew in the war of Midian with the women, and brought the spoils, and Moses was wroth, and said, Wherefore have ye saved all the women alive? For these were to the children of Israel for a stumbling block, according to the word of Balaam, to cause them to depart from and despise the word of the Lord for Peor's sake. Verse 9. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. By this he again hints at another charge, which he likewise states at the end, blaming them because they contended about signs, and murmured on account of temptations, saying, When will the good things come? When the rewards? Wherefore also he adds, on this account correcting and alarming them. Verse 10. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. For what is required is, not only to suffer for Christ, but also nobly to bear the things that come on us, and with all gladness, since this is the nature of every crown. Yea, and unless this be so, punishment rather will attend men, taking calamity with a bad grace. Wherefore also the apostles, when they were beaten, rejoiced, and Paul gloried in his suffering. Verse 11. Now all these things happened unto them for ensamples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Again he terrifies them, speaking of the ends, and prepares them to expect things greater than had already taken place. For that we shall suffer punishment is manifest, saith he, from what hath been said, even to those who disbelieve the statements concerning hellfire, but that the punishment also will be more severe is evident from the more numerous blessings which we have enjoyed, and from the things of which those were but figures. Since if in the gifts one go beyond the other, it is more evident that so it will be in the punishment likewise. For this cause he both calls them types, and said that they were written for us, and made mention of an end, that he might remind them of the consummation of all things. For not such will be the penalties then, as to admit of a termination, and be done away, but the chastisement will be eternal. For even as the punishments in this world are ended with the present life, so those in the next continually remain. But when he said the ends of the world, he means nothing else, but that the fearful judgment is henceforth nigh at hand. Verse 12. Wherefore let him that thinketh he stand take heed lest he fall. Again he cast down their pride, who thought highly of their knowledge. For if they who had so great privileges suffered such things, and some for murmuring alone were visited with such punishment, and others for tempting, and neither their multitude moved God to repent, nor their having attained to such things, much more shall it be so in our case, except when we be sober. And well said he that thinketh he standeth. For this is not even standing as one ought to stand, to rely on yourself. For quickly will such an one fall, since they too, had they not been high-minded and self-confident, but of a subdued frame of mind, would not have suffered these things. Whence it is evident that boasting first of all, and carelessness afterwards, and gluttony are the sources of these evils. Wherefore, even though you stand, take heed lest you fall. For our standing here is not secure standing, no, not until we be delivered out of the waves of this present life, and have sailed into that tranquil haven. Be not therefore high-minded at thy standing, but guard against thy falling. For if Paul feared, who was firmer than all, much more ought we to fear. Now the apostle's word, as we have seen, was, Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. But we cannot say even this, all of us, so to speak, having fallen and lying prostrate on the ground. For to whom am I to say this? To him that committeth extortion every day? Nay, he lies prostrate with a mighty fall. To the fornicator? He too is cast down to the ground. To the drunkard, he also is fallen, and knoweth not even that he is fallen. So that it is not the season for this word, but for that saying of the prophet, which he spake to the Jews also, He that falleth does not rise again. For all are fallen, and to rise again they have no mind, so that our exhortation is not concerning the falling, but concerning the ability of them that are fallen to rise. Let us rise again then, late though it be, beloved. Let us rise again, late though it be, beloved. Let us rise again, and let us stand nobly. How long do we lie prostrate? How long are we drunken, besotted with the excess desire of the things of this life? It is a meet opportunity now to say, To whom shall I speak and give warning? So deaf are all men become, even to the very instruction of wisdom, and thence filled with abundance of evils. And were it possible to discern their souls naked, as in armies when the battle is ended, when may behold some dead and some wounded, so also in the church we might see. Wherefore I beseech and implore you, let us stretch out a hand to each other, and thoroughly raise ourselves up. For I myself am one of them that are smitten, and require one to apply some remedies. Do not however despair on this account. For what if the wounds be severe? Yet are they not incurable. Such is our physician. Only let us feel our wounds. Although we be arrived at the very extreme of wickedness, many are the ways of safety which he strikes out for us. Thus if thou forbear to be angry with thy neighbor, thine own sins shall be forgiven. For if ye forgive men, saith he, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. And if thou give alms, he will remit thee thy sins. For break off thy sins, saith he, by alms. And if thou pray earnestly, thou shalt enjoy forgiveness. And this the widow signifieth, who prevaileth upon that cruel judge by the importunity of her prayer. And if thou accuse thine own sins, thou hast relief. For declare thou thine iniquities first, that thou mayest be justified. And if thou art sorrowful on account of these things, this too will be to thee a powerful remedy. For I have seen, saith he, that he was grieved, and went sorrowful, and I have healed his ways. And if, when thou sufferest any evil, thou bear it nobly, thou hast put away the whole. For this also did Abraham say to the rich man, that Lazarus received his evil things, and here he is comforted. And if thou hast pity on the widow, thy sins are washed away. For judge, saith he, the orphan, and plead for the widow, and come, let us reason together, saith the Lord. And if your sins be as scarlet, I will make them white as snow. And if they be crimson, I will make them white as wool. For not even a single scar of the wounds doth he suffer to appear. Yea, and though we become to that depth of misery into which he fell, who devoured his father's substance and fed upon husks, and should repent, we are undoubtedly saved. And though we owe 10,000 talents, if we fall down before God and bear no malice, all things are forgiven us. Although we have wandered away to that place whither the sheep strayed from his keeper, even thence he recovers us again. Only let us be willing, beloved, for God is merciful. Wherefore both in the case of him that owed 10,000 talents, he was content with his falling down before him. And in the case of him who had devoured his father's goods, with his return only, and in the case of the sheep, with its willingness to be born. Consider therefore the greatness of his mercy. Let us here make him propitious unto us, and let us come before his face by a public confession, that we may not depart hence without excuse, and have to endure that extreme punishment. For if in the present life we exhibit even an ordinary diligence, we shall gain the greatest rewards. But if we depart having become nothing better here, even though we repent ever so earnestly there, it will do us no good. For it was our duty to have stricken while yet remaining within the lists, not after the assembly was broken up idly to lament and weep, as that rich man did, bewailing and deploring himself, but to no purpose now and in vain, since he overlooked the time in which he ought to have done these things. And not he alone, but many others there are like him now among the rich, not willing to despise wealth, but despising their own souls for wealth's sake. At whom I cannot but wonder, when I see men continually interceding with God for mercy, whilst they are implacably set against their own good, and unsparing of their very soul, as if it were an enemy. Let us not then trifle, beloved, let us not trifle nor delude ourselves, beseeching God to have mercy on us, whilst we ourselves prefer both money and luxury, and in fact all things to his mercy. For neither if any one brought before thee a case, and said, in accusation of such an one, that being to suffer 10,000 deaths, and having it in his power to rid himself of the sentence by a little money, he chose rather to die than to give up any of his property, would you say that he was worthy of any mercy or compassion? Now in this same way do thou also reason touching thyself, for we too act in this way, and, making light of our own salvation, we are sparing of our money. How then dost thou beseech God to spare thee, when thou thyself art so unsparing of thyself, and honourest money above thy soul? Wherefore also I am greatly astonished to see how great witchery lies hid in wealth, or rather not in wealth, but in the souls of those that are beguiled. For there are those who utterly deride this sorcery, for which among the things therein is really capable of bewitching us. Is it not inanimate matter? Is it not transitory? Is not the possession thereof unworthy of trust? Is it not full of fears and dangers, nay, of murders and conspiracy, of enmity and hatred, or carelessness and much vice? Is it not dust and ashes? What madness have we here? What disease? But, say you, we ought not merely to bring such accusations against those that are so diseased, but also to destroy the passion. And in what other way shall we destroy it, except by pointing out its baseness, and how full it is of innumerable evils? But of this it is not easy to persuade a lover concerning the objects of his love. Well then, we must set full in his view another sort of beauty, but incorporeal beauty he sees not, being yet in his disease. Well then, let us show him some beauty of the corporeal kind, and say to him, consider the meadows, and the flowers therein, which are more sparkling than any gold, and more elegant and transparent than all kinds of precious stones. Consider the limpid streams from their fountains, the streams which, like oil, flow noiselessly out of the earth. Ascend to heaven, and behold the lustre of the sun, the beauty of the moon, the stars that cluster like flowers. Why, what is this, say you, since we do not, I suppose, make use of them as of wealth? Nay, we use them more than wealth, inasmuch as the use thereof is more needful, the enjoyment more secure. For thou hast no fear, lest, like money, any one should take them and go off with them. But you may ever be confident of having them, and that without anxiety or care. But if thou grieve, because thou enjoyest them in common with others, and dost not possess them alone like money, it is not money, but mere covetousness, which thou seemest to me to be in love with, nor would even the money be an object of thy desire, if it had been placed within the reach of all in common. Therefore, since we have found the beloved object, I mean covetousness, come, let me show thee how she hates and abhors thee, how many swords she sharpens against thee, how many pits she digs, how many nooses she ties, how many precipices she prepares, that thus at any rate thou mayest do away with the charm. Whence then are we to obtain this knowledge? From the highways, from the wars, from the sea, from the courts of justice, for she hath both filled the sea with blood, and the swords of the judges she often dyes with blood contrary to law, and arms those who on the highways lie in wait day and night, and persuades men to forget nature, and make parricides, and murderers of mothers, and introduces all sorts of evils into men's life, which is the reason why Paul entitles her the root of evil. She suffers not her lovers to be in any better condition than those who work in the mines. For as they, perpetually shut up in darkness and in chains, labor unprofitably, so also these buried in the caves of avarice, no one using any force with them, voluntarily draw their punishment on themselves, binding on them fetters that cannot be broken, and on those condemned to the mines, at least when even comes on, are released from their toils, but these both day and night are digging in these wretched mines. And to those there is a definite limit of that hard labor, but these know no limit. But the more they dig, so much the greater hardship do they desire. And what if those do it unwillingly, but these with their will, in that thou tellest me of the grievous part of the disease, that it is even impossible for them to be rid of it, since they do not so much as hate their own wretchedness. But as a swine in mud, so also do these delight to wallow in the noisome mire of avarice, suffering worse things than those condemned ones. As to the fact that they are in a worse condition, hear the circumstances of the one, and then thou wilt know the state of the other. Now it is said that the soil which is impregnated with gold has certain dens and recesses in those gloomy caverns. The malefactor then condemns to labor in that place, taking for that purpose a lamp and a spade. So we are told enters within, and carries with him a cruse, a drop oil, from thence into the lamp, because there is darkness even by day, without a ray of light, as I said before. Then, when the time of day calls him to his wretched meal, himself, they say, is ignorant of the time, but his jailer from above, striking violently on the cave, by that clattering sound declares to those who are at work below the end of the day. Do ye not shudder when you hear all this? Let us see now whether there be not things more grievous than these in the case of the covetous. For these two, in the first place, have a severer jailer, viz. Avarice, and so much severer, as that together with their body he chains also their soul. And this darkness also is more awful than that, for it is not subject to sense, but producing it within, whithersoever they go, they carry it all about with themselves. For the eye of their soul is put out, which is the reason why more than all Christ calls them wretched, saying, But if the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? And they for their part have at least a lamp shining. But these are deprived even of this beam of light, and therefore every day they fall into countless pitfalls. And the condemned, when night overtakes them, have a respite, sailing into that calm port which is common to all the unfortunate. I mean the night, but against the covetous even this harbor is blocked up by their own avarice. Such grievous thoughts have they even at night, since then, without disturbance from anyone, at full leisure they cut themselves to pieces. Such are the circumstances in this world. But those the next, what discourse shall exhibit? The intolerable furnaces, the rivers burning with fire, the gnashing of teeth, the chains never to be loosed, the envenomed worm, the rayless gloom, the never-ending miseries. Let us fear them, beloved. Let us fear the fountain of so great punishments, the insatiate madness, the destroyer of our salvation. For it is impossible at the same time both to love money and your soul. Let us be convinced that wealth is dust and ashes, that it leaves us when we depart thence, or rather that even before our departure it oftentimes darts away from us, and injures us both in regard of the future and in respect of the present life. For before hellfire and before that punishment, even here it surrounds us with innumerable wars, and stirs up strifes and contests. For nothing is so apt to cause war as avarice, nothing so apt to produce beggary, whether it show itself in wealth or in poverty. For in the souls of poor men also this grievous disease ariseth, and wears their poverty still barer. And if there be found a poor covetous man, such an one suffers not punishment in money, but in hunger, for he allows himself to enjoy his moderate means with comfort, but both racks his belly with hunger, and punishes his whole body with nakedness and cold. and everywhere appears more squalid and dirty than any prisoners, and is always wailing and lamenting, as though he were more wretched than all, though there be 10,000 poorer than he. This man, whither he go into the marketplace, goes away with many a stripe, or into the bath, or into the theatre, he will still be receiving more wounds, not only from the spectators, but also from those upon the stage, where he beholds not a few of the unchaste women glittering in gold. This man again, whether he sail upon the sea, regarding the merchants and their richly freighted ships, and their enormous profits, will not even count himself to live, or whether he travel by land, reckoning up the fields, the suburban farms, the inns, the baths, the revenues arising out of them. His own life will thenceforth seem to him not to be endured as life, or whether thou shut him up at home, he will but rub and fret the wounds received in the market, and so by himself do greater despite to his own soul, and he knows only one consolation for the evils which oppress him, death and deliverance from this life. And these things not the poor man only, but the rich also will suffer, who falls into this disease, and so much more than the poor, inasmuch as the tyranny presses more vehemently on him, and the intoxication is greater. Wherefore also he will account himself poorer than all, or rather he is poorer, for riches and poverty are determined not by the measure of the substance, but by the disposition of the mind, and he rather is the poorest of all, who is always hankering after more, and is never able to stay this wicked lust. On all these accounts, then, let us flee covetousness, the maker of beggars, the destroyer of souls, the friend of hell, the enemy of the kingdom of heaven, the mother of all evils together, and let us despise wealth, that we may enjoy wealth, and with wealth may enjoy also the good things promised to us, unto which may we all obtain, etc. End of Homily 23. Homily 24 of Homilies of St. John Chrysostom on First Corinthians, Part 1. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Homily 24. 1 Corinthians 10:13. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. Thus because he hath terrified them greatly, relating the ancient examples, and thrown them into an agony, saying, Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. Though they had borne many temptations, and had exercised themselves many times therein. For I was with you, saith he, in weakness and in fear, and in much trembling, lest they should say, Why terrify and alarm us? We are not unexercised in these troubles, for we have been both chased and persecuted, and many and continual dangers have we endured. Repressing again their pride, he says, There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man, i.e., small, brief, moderate. For he uses the expression common to man, in respect of what is small, as when he says, I speak after the manner of men, because of the infirmity of your flesh. Think not then great things, saith he, as though ye had overcome the storm. For never have ye seen a danger threatening death, nor temptation intending slaughter. Which also he said to the Hebrews, Ye have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Then, because he had terrified them, see how again he raises them up, at the same time recommending moderation. In the words, God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able. There are therefore temptations, which we are not able to bear. And what are these? All, so to speak. For the ability lies in God, turning the scale, a power which we draw down by our own will. Wherefore, that thou mayest know and see, that not only those which exceed our power, but not even these which are common to man, it is possible without assistance from God easily to bear, he added, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. For, saith he, not even those moderate temptations, as I was remarking, may we bear by our own power, but even in them we require aid from him in our warfare, that we may pass through them, and until we have passed, bear them. For he gives patience and brings on a speedy release, so that in this way also the temptation becomes bearable. This he covertly intimates, saying, will also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. In all things he refers to him. Verse 14. Wherefore, my brethren, flee from idolatry. Again he courts them by the name of kindred, and urges them to be rid of this sin with all speed. For he did not simply depart, but flee, and he calls the matter idolatry, and no longer bids them quit it merely on account of the injury to their neighbor, but signifies that the very thing of itself is sufficient to bring a great destruction. Verse 15. I speak as unto wise men. Judge ye what I say, because he hath cried aloud and heightened the accusation, calling it idolatry, that he might not seem to exasperate them, and to make his speech disguising. In what follows he refers the decision to them, and sets his judges down on their tribunal with an encomium. For I speak as unto wise men, saith he, which is a mark of one very confident of his own rights, that he should make the accused himself the judge of his allegations. Thus also he more elevates the hearer, when he discourses not as commanding, nor as laying down the law, but as advising with them, and as actually pleading before them. For with the Jews, as more foolishly and childishly disposed, God did not so discourse, nor did he, in every instance, acquaint them with the reasons of the commands, but merely enjoined them. But here, because we have the privilege of great liberty, we are even admitted to be counselors, and he discourses as with friends, and says, I need no other judges. Do ye yourselves pass this sentence upon me. I take you for arbiters. Verse 16. The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? What sayest thou, O blessed Paul, when thou wouldest appeal to the hearer's reverence, when thou art making mention of awful mysteries, dost thou give the title of cup of blessing to that fearful and most tremendous cup? Yea, saith he, and no mean title is that which was spoken. For when I call it blessing, I unfold all the treasure of God's goodness, and call to mind those mighty gifts. Since we too, recounting over the cup the unspeakable mysteries of God, and all that we have been made partakers of, so proceed to offer it, and to communicate, giving him thanks, that he hath delivered from error the whole race of mankind, that being afar off he made them nigh, and when they had no hope, and were without God in the world, he appointed them his own brethren and fellow heirs. For these and for all such things, giving thanks, thus we approach. How then are not your doings inconsistent, saith he, O ye Corinthians, blessing God for delivering you from idols, yet running again to their tables? The cup of blessing which we bless, is it not the communion of the blood of Christ? Very persuasively spake he, and awfully, for what he says is this which is in the cup is that which flowed from his side, and of that do we partake. But he called it the cup of blessing, because, holding it in our hands, we so proceed to exalt him in our hymn, wondering, astonished at his unspeakable gift, blessing him, among other things, for the pouring out of this self-same draught, that we might not abide in error, and not only for the pouring it out, but also for the imparting thereof to us all. Wherefore, if thou desire blood, saith he, redden not the altar of idols with the slaughter of brute beasts, but my altar with my blood. Tell me, what can be more tremendous than this? What more tenderly kind? This also lovers do, when they see those whom they love desiring what belongs to strangers, and despising their own. They give what belongs to themselves, and so persuade them to withdraw themselves from the gifts of those others. Lovers, however, display this liberality in goods and money and garments, but in blood none ever did so, whereas Christ even herein exhibited his care and fervent love for us. And in the old covenant, because they were in an imperfect state, the blood which they used to offer to idols, he himself submitted to receive, that he might separate them from those idols, which very thing again was a proof of his unspeakable affection. But here he hath transferred the sacred office to that which is far more awful and glorious, changing the very sacrifice itself, and instead of the slaughter of irrational creatures, commanding to offer up himself. The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? Wherefore said he not the participation? Because he intended to express something more, and to point out how close was the union, in that we communicate not only by participating and partaking, but also by being united. For as that body is united to Christ, so also are we united to him by this bread. But why adds he also, which we break? For although in the Eucharist one may see this done, yet on the cross not so, but the very contrary. For a bone of him, saith one, shall not be broken. But that which he suffered not on the cross, this he suffers in the oblation for thy sake, and he submits to be broken, that he may fill all men. Further, because he said, the communion of the body, and that which communicates is another thing from that whereof it communicates. Even this, which seemeth to be but a small difference, he took away. For having said, the communion of the body, he sought again to express something nearer. Wherefore also he added, verse 17, For we being many are one bread, one body. For why speak I of communion, saith he? We are that selfsame body. For what is the bread? The body of Christ. And what do they become who partake of it? The body of Christ, not many bodies, but one body. For as the bread, consisting of many grains, is made one, so that the grains nowhere appear, they exist indeed, but their difference is not seen, by reason of their conjunction. So are we conjoined both with each other and with Christ, there not being one body for thee, and another for thy neighbor to be nourished by, but the very same for all. Where also he adds, For we are all partakers of that one bread. Now if we are all nourished of the same, and all become the same, why do we not show forth the same love, and become also in this respect one? For this was the old way too, in the time of our forefathers. For the multitude of them that believed, saith the text, were of one heart and of one soul. Not so, however, now, but altogether the reverse. Many and various are the contests betwixt all, and worse than wild beasts are we affected towards each other's members. And Christ indeed made thee, so far remote, one with himself, but thou dost not deign to be united even to thy brother with due exactness, but separatest thyself, having had the privilege of so great love and life from the Lord. For he gave not simply even his own body, but because the former nature of the flesh, which was framed out of earth, had first become deadened by sin and destitute of life, he brought in, as one may say, another sort of dough and leaven, his own flesh, by nature indeed the same, but free from sin and full of life, and gave to all to partake thereof, that being nourished by this, and laying aside the old dead material, we might be blended together unto the eternal life by means of this table. Verse 18, Behold Israel after the flesh. Are not they which eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? Again, from the old covenant he leads them unto this point also. For because they were far beneath the greatness of the things which had been spoken, he persuades both them from former things, and from those which they were accustomed. And he says, well, according to the flesh, as though they themselves were according to the Spirit. And what he says is of this nature, even from persons of the grosser sort ye may be instructed, that they who eat of the sacrifices are partakers of the altar, Dost thou see how he intimates that they who seem to be perfect have not perfect knowledge, if they know not even this, that the result of these sacrifices to many oftentimes is a certain communion and friendship with devils, the practice drawing them on by degrees. And if among men the fellowship of salts and the table becomes an occasion and token of friendship, it is possible that this may happen also in the case of devils. But do thou, I pray thee, consider how with regard to the Jews he said not, they are partakers with God, but they are partakers of the altar, for what was placed thereon was burnt. But in respect of the body of Christ not so. But how? Is it the communion of the Lord's body? For not of the altar, but of Christ himself are we made partakers. But having said that they are partakers of the altar, afterwards fearing lest he should seem to discourse, as if the idols had any power, and could do any injury, see again how he overthrows them, saying, verse 14, What say I then, that the idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything? As if he had said, Now these things I affirm, and try to withdraw you from the idols, not as though they could do any injury or had any power, for an idol is nothing, but I wish you to despise them. And if thou wilt have us despise them, saith one, wherefore dost thou carefully withdraw us from them? Because they are not offered to the Lord. Verse 20, For that which the Gentiles sacrifice, saith he, they sacrifice to devils, and not to God. Do not then run to the contrary things, for neither if thou wert a king's son, and having the privilege of thy father's table, shouldest leave it after all, and choose to partake of the table of the condemned, and the prisoners in the dungeon, would thy father permit it. But with great vehemence he would withdraw thee, not as though the table would harm thee, but because it disgraces thy nobility and the royal table. For verily these two are servants who have offended, dishonored, condemned, prisoners reserved for intolerable punishment, accountable for 10,000 crimes. How then art thou not ashamed to imitate the gluttonous and vulgar crew, in that when these condemned persons set out a table, thou runnest thither, and partakest of the viands? Here is the cause why I seek to withdraw thee, for the intention of the sacrificers, and the person of the receivers maketh the things set before thee unclean, and I would not that ye should have fellowship with devils. Perceivest thou the kindness of a careful father? Perceivest thou also the very word, what force it hath to express his feeling? For it is my wish, saith he, that you have nothing common with them. Next, because he brought in the saying by way of exhortation, lest any of the grosser sort should make light of it, as having license, because he said, I would not, and judge ye, he positively affirms in what follows, and lays down the law, saying, verse 21, Ye cannot drink the cup of the Lord, and the cup of devils. Ye cannot be partakers of the Lord's table, and of the table of devils. But he contends himself with the mere terms, for the purpose of keeping them away. Then speaking also to their sense of shame, verse 22, Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? I.e., are we tempting him? Whether he is able to punish us, and irritating him, by going over to the adversaries and taking our stand with his enemies. And this he said, reminding them of an ancient history, and of their father's transgression. Wherefore also he makes use of this saying, which Moses likewise of old used against the Jews, accusing them of idolatry in the person of God. For they, saith he, have moved me to jealousy with that which is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. Are we not stronger than he? Dost thou see how terribly, how awfully he rebukes them, thoroughly shaking their very nerves, and by his way of reducing them to an absurdity, touching them to the quick, and bringing down their pride? Well, by why, some one will say, did he not set down these things at first, which would be most effectual to withdraw them? because it is his custom to prove his point by many particulars, and to place the strongest last, and to prevail by proving more than was necessary. On this account, then, he began from the lesser topics, and so made his way to that which is the sum of all evils. Since so that last point also became more easily admitted, their mind having been soothed down by the things said before. Verses 23 and 24. All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. Seest thou his exact wisdom? Because it was likely that they might say, I am perfect and master of myself, and it does me no harm to partake of what is set before me. Even so saith he, perfect thou art, and master of thyself. Do not, however, look to this, but whether the results involve not injury, nay subversion. For both these he mentioned, saying all things are not expedient, all things edify not, and using the former with reference to oneself, the latter to one's brother, since the cause are not expedient, is a covert intimation of the ruin of the person to whom he speaks. But the clause edify not, of the offense of the brother. Wherefore also he adds, let no man seek his own, which he everywhere and in every epistle insists upon, both in that to the Romans, when he says, for even Christ pleased not himself. And again, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit. And again, in this place, he does not, however, fully work it out here. That is, since in what had gone before, he had established it at length, and shown that he nowhere seeks his own, but both to the Jews became as a Jew, and to them that are without law as without law, and used not his own liberty and power at random, but to the profit of all, serving all. Here he broke off, content with a few words, and by these few guiding them to the remembrance of all which he had said before. These things therefore knowing, let us also, beloved, consult for the good of the brethren, and preserve unity with them. For to this that fearful and tremendous sacrifice leads us, warning us above all things to approach it with one mind and fervent love, and thereby becoming eagles, so to mount up to the very heaven. For whithersoever the carcass is, saith he, there also will be the eagles, calling his body a carcass by reason of his death. For unless he had fallen, we should not have risen again. But he calls us eagles, implying that he who draws nigh to this body must be on high and have nothing in common with the earth, nor wind himself downwards and creep along, but must ever be soaring heavenwards, and look on the Son of Righteousness, and have the eye of his mind quick-sighted. For eagles, not daws, have a right to this table. Those also shall then meet him, descending from heaven, who now worthily have this privilege, even as they who do so unworthily shall suffer the extremest torments. For if one would not inconsiderably receive a king, why say I a king? Nay, were it but a royal robe, one would not inconsiderately touch it with unclean hands. Though he should be in solitude, though alone, though no man were at hand, and yet the robe is naught but certain threads spun by worms. And if thou admirest the dye, this too is the blood of a dead fish. Nevertheless, one would not choose to venture on it with polluted hands. I say now, if even a man's garment be what one would not venture inconsiderately to touch, what shall we say of the body of him who is God over all, spotless, pure, associate with that divine nature, the body whereby we are and live, whereby the gates of hell were broken down, and the sanctuaries of heaven opened? How shall we receive this with so great insolence? Let us not, I pray you, let us not slay ourselves by our irreverence, but with all awfulness and purity let us draw nigh to it, and when thou seest it set before thee, say thou to thyself, because of this body, am I no longer earth and ashes, no longer a prisoner but free. Because of this I hope for heaven, and to receive the good things therein, immortal life, the portion of angels, converse with Christ. This body, nailed and scourged, was more than death could stand against. This body the very sun saw crucified, and turned aside his beams. For this both the veil was rent in that moment, and rocks were burst asunder, and all the earth was shaken. This is even that body, the blood-stained, the smitten, and that out of which gushed the saving fountains, the one of blood, the other of water, for all the world. Wouldst thou from another source also learn its power? Ask of her, diseased with an issue of blood, who laid hold not of itself, but of the garment with which it was clad, nay, not of the whole of this, but of the hem. Ask the sea which bare it on its back, ask even of the devil himself, and say, Whence hast thou that incurable stroke? Whence hast thou no longer any power? Whence art thou captive? By whom hast thou been seized in thy flight? And he will give no other answer than this, the body that was crucified. By this were his stings broken in pieces. By this was his head crushed. By this were the powers and the principalities made a show of. For, saith he, having spoiled principalities and powers, he made a show of them openly, triumphing over them in it. Ask also death, and say, Whence is it that thy sting hath been taken away, thy victory abolished, thy sinews cut out, and thou become the laughingstock of girls and children, who was before a terror even to kings, and to all righteous men? And he will ascribe it to this body. For when this was crucified, then were the dead raised, then was that prison burst, and the gates of brass were broken, and the dead were loosed, and the keepers of hell gate all quaked for fear. And yet, had he been one of the many, death, on the contrary, should have become more mighty. But it was not so, for he was not one of the many. Therefore was death dissolved. And as they who take food, which they are unable to retain, on account of that vomit also, what was before lodged in them, so also it happened unto death. That body which he could not work upon, he received, and therefore had to cast forth those also which he had within him. Yea, he travailed, whilst he held him, and was straitened until he vomited him up. Wherefore saith the Apostle, having loosed the pains of death. For never woman labouring of child was so full of anguish, as he was torn and racked in sunder, while he held the body of the Lord. And that which happened to be the Babylonian dragon, when having taken the food, it burst asunder in the midst. This also happened unto him, for Christ came not forth again by the mouth of death, but having burst asunder and ripped up in the very midst the belly of the dragon, thus from his secret chambers right gloriously he issued forth, and flung abroad his beams, not to this heaven alone, but to the very throne most high, for even thither did he carry it up. This body he hath given to us to hold and to eat, a thing very appropriate to intense love. For those whom we kiss vehemently, we oftentimes even bite with our teeth. Wherefore also Job, indicating the love of his servants towards him, said that they oftentimes, out of their great affection towards him, said, Oh, that we were filled with his flesh. Even so, Christ hath given to us to be filled with his flesh, drawing us on to greater love. Let us draw nigh to him then with fervency, and with inflamed love, and let us not have to endure punishment. For in proportion to the greatness of the benefits bestowed on us, so much the more exceedingly are we chastised, when we show ourselves unworthy of the bountifulness. This body, even lying in a manger, the Magi reverenced, and men profane and barbarous, leaving their country and their home, both set out on a long journey, and when they came, with fear and great trembling, worshipped him. Behold now, let us at least imitate those barbarians, we who are citizens of heaven. For they indeed, when they saw him but in a manger and in a shed, and no such thing was in sight, as thou beholdest now, drew near with great awe. But thou beholdest him, not in the manger, but on the altar, not a woman holding him in her arms, but the priest standing by, and the Spirit with exceeding bounty hovering over the gifts set before us. Thou dost not see merely this body itself, as they did, but thou knowest also its power, and the whole economy, and art ignorant of none of the holy things which are brought to pass by it, having been exactly initiated into all. Let us therefore wake ourselves up, and be filled with horror, and let us show forth a reverence far beyond that of those barbarians, that we may not, by random and careless approaches, heap fire upon our own heads. But these things I say, not to keep us from approaching, but to keep us from approaching without consideration. For as the approaching at random is dangerous, so the not communicating in those mystical suppers is famine and death. For this table is the sinews of our soul, the bond of our mind, the foundation of our confidence, our hope, our salvation, our light, our life. When with this sacrifice we depart into the other world, with much confidence we shall tread the sacred threshold, fenced round on every side, as with a kind of golden armor. And why speak I of the world to come, since here this mystery makes earth become to thee a heaven? Open only for once the gates of heaven, and look in, nay, rather not of heaven, but of the heaven of heavens, and then thou wilt behold what I have been speaking of. For what is there most precious of all, this will I show thee lying upon the earth. For as in royal palaces, what is most glorious of all is not walls nor golden roofs, but the person of the king sitting on the throne. So likewise in heaven the body of the king. But this thou art now permitted to see upon earth. For it is not angels nor archangels nor heavens and heavens of heavens that I will show thee, but the very Lord and owner of these. Perceivest thou how that which is more precious than all things is seen by thee on earth, and not seen only, but also touched, and not only touched, but likewise eaten, and after receiving it thou goest home? Make thy soul clean then, prepare thy mind for the reception of these mysteries, for if thou wert entrusted to carry a king's child with the robes, the purple and the diadem, thou wouldest cast away all things which are upon the earth. But now that it is no child of man, however royal soever, but the only begotten Son of God himself, whom thou receivest, dost thou not thrill with awe, tell me, and cast away all the love of all worldly things, and have no bravery but that wherewith to adorn thyself? Or dost thou still look towards earth, and love money, and flutter after gold? What pardon then canst thou have? What excuse? Knowest thou not that all this worldly luxury is loathsome to thy Lord? Was it not for this that on his birth he was laid in a manger, and took to himself a mother of low estate? Did he not for this say to him that was looking after gain, But the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head? And what did the disciples? Did they not observe the same law, going to the houses of the poor, and lodged, one with a tanner, another with a tent-maker, and with the seller of purple? For they inquired not after the splendor of the house, but for the virtues of men's souls. These therefore let us emulate, hastening by the beauty of pillars and of marbles, and seeking the mansions which are above. And let us tread under foot all the pride here below, with all love of money, and acquire a lofty mind. For if we be sober-minded, not even this whole world is worthy of us, much less porticos and arcades. Wherefore I beseech you, let us adorn our souls, let us fit up this house, which we are also to have with us when we depart, that we may attain even to the eternal blessings, through the grace and mercy, etc. End of Homily 24. End of Homilies of St. John Chrysostom on First Corinthians, Part 1. Translated by Herbert Keastel Cornish and John Medley.